The call came just as I was stepping off stage, the roar of the crowd still ringing in my ears. My manager, Paulo, was waiting in the wings, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite fit with the euphoria of a sold-out show. One look at his eyes, and I knew. Something was wrong back home. I listened to Paulo's words in a daze, the adrenaline from my performance fading rapidly, replaced by a cold dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. My mother was sick. Very sick. The details blurred together, something about her heart, about tests and hospitals and words that belonged in medical dramas, not in my real life. As I mechanically went through the motions of my post-show routine, removing makeup, changing clothes, nodding at congratulations from the crew, my mind was already racing thousands of kilometers away to a small town I'd left behind years ago. A town I'd promised myself I'd never return to. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Luisa Mendez, the voice of the century, as the magazines like to call me, unable to find my own voice to respond to this news. The woman who could belt out songs that made thousands weep was struck dumb by the thought of facing her past. Back in my hotel room, I paced like a caged animal. The glittering skyline of one of the biggest cities in the world spread out before me, a testament to how far I'd come from that dusty little town. I'd worked so hard to leave that life behind, to become someone new, someone bigger than the small town girl with big dreams. But as I caught my reflection in the window, I saw not the polished pop star, but the scared little girl who used to sing lullabies to her baby brother, Miguel. The thought of him sent a fresh wave of guilt and anxiety through me. How long had it been since we'd spoken? Since he had bothered to call home for more than a perfunctory holiday greeting? The decision to go back wasn't really a decision at all. It was an inevitability, as certain as the sunrise. Yet every fiber of my being rebelled against it. I knew what awaited me there. The whispers, the judgmental looks, the weight of expectations and disappointments I'd left behind. As I mechanically packed a suitcase, my hands shaking slightly, I tried to steel myself for what was to come. The thought of seeing my mother in a hospital bed, frail and vulnerable, was almost too much to bear. And Miguel, what would I say to him after all these years? My phone buzzed incessantly. Paulo trying to rearrange tour dates. My publicist no doubt crafting a statement about my sudden departure. Fans flooding social media with questions and well wishes. But all of it felt distant, unreal. In that moment, I wasn't Luisa Mendez, the star. I was just Luisa, a daughter called home to face the music of her past. As the first light of dawn broke over the city, I found myself humming softly. It took me a moment to recognize the tune, an old lullaby my mother used to sing, a song of home and comfort I hadn't thought about in years. Tears pricked at my eyes as I realized the irony. I, who had sung on the grandest stages in the world, was now being called back by the simplest, most powerful song of all, the Cradle's song of family and roots. With a deep breath, I shouldered my bag and stepped out of the hotel room. The journey ahead was more daunting than any stadium show, any world tour. I was going home to face the music I had been running from for so long. And this time, there would be no encore, no adoring fans to hide behind. Just the raw, unvarnished truth of the life I had left behind, and the people I would have to face. As the car pulled away from the curb, carrying me towards the airport and the small town that awaited, I closed my eyes and let the old lullaby wash over me. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. The hardest song I'd ever have to sing was just beginning. The familiar scent of eucalyptus and dust hit me as soon as I stepped off the bus. My hometown hadn't changed much in the years I had been gone. The same sleepy main street, the same faded storefronts, the same curious eyes peering out from behind lace curtains. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the glittering armor of my stage persona had been stripped away, leaving only the small-town girl I'd tried so hard to outgrow. My heels clicked on the uneven sidewalk, the sound seeming to echo through the quiet afternoon. Each step was a struggle between the urge to run back to the bus and the pull of duty that drew me forward. Whispers followed in my wake, a ripple of recognition and speculation that made my skin crawl. I could almost hear the gossip starting. Luisa Mendez, back from the big city, tail between her legs. Memories ambushed me at every corner. The old cinema where I had dreamed of seeing my name in lights. The school where I had first realized my voice could move people to tears. The park where Miguel and I had spent countless afternoons, him strumming his battered guitar while I sang, both of us imagining a future far from here. Miguel. The thought of him sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. How would he look at me now? The sister who'd left him behind, who'd chosen stardom over family. Our childhood home loomed before me, a modest 2-story house that seemed smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown. It struck me then how much I had neglected, not just my family, but the very roots that had nourished my talent. I hesitated at the gate, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the latch. The weight of years of absence pressed down on me, making each step towards the front door feel like wading through molasses. The porch creaked under my feet, a sound so achingly familiar it almost brought tears to my eyes. Before I could knock, the door swung open. And there he was. Miguel. My little brother, not so little anymore. The years had etched lines around his eyes, hardened the set of his jaw. His eyes, so like our mother's, met mine with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Relief? Resentment? Perhaps both. We stood there, frozen in a tableau of awkwardness, neither quite knowing how to bridge the chasm of years and unspoken words between us. The air felt thick with tension, with all the things we needed to say but didn't know how. Miguel's gaze traveled over me, taking in the designer clothes, the carefully styled hair, all the trappings of the life I had chosen over this one. I saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of the hurt little boy had left behind all those years ago. He stepped back, wordlessly inviting me in. As I crossed the threshold, the familiar sense of home, Mom's favorite lavender soap, the lingering aroma of coffee, washed over me. For a moment, I was that young girl again, full of dreams and blissfully unaware of the cost they would exact. The living room was a time capsule, virtually unchanged since I had left. Family photos lined the walls, chronicling a history I had been absent from. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, all celebrated without me. The guilt I'd managed to keep at bay in the glitz and glamour of my career now hit me full force. Miguel moved towards the kitchen, his back to me, a clear message. The distance between us was more than physical. It was a gulf of shared experiences and divergent paths. As I followed him, each step feeling like a reckoning, I realized that coming home was just the beginning. The real journey, the one to reconnect with my brother, to make amends for my absence, was only just starting. The kitchen door swung shut behind us, and I braced myself for whatever came next. The prodigal daughter had returned, but would she be welcomed or merely tolerated? As Miguel turned to face me, his expression unreadable, I knew that the hardest performance of my life was about to begin. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room clung to my clothes as I slumped into the worn armchair beside my mother's bed. The steady beep of monitors and the hiss of oxygen formed a discordant melody, so different from the music that had defined my life for so long. Mom lay there, small and fragile, a far cry from the vibrant woman who had once filled our home with laughter and song. As I watched her chest rise and fall with labored breaths, memories washed over me like waves. I remembered her hands, now thin and pale, once strong and sure as they guided mine over piano keys. Her voice, now barely a whisper, had once soared alongside mine in impromptu duets in our tiny kitchen. Those same hands had wiped away my tears after my first heartbreak, had pushed me towards my dreams even as her own remained unfulfilled. The weight of care settled on my shoulders, heavy and unfamiliar. I, who had been cared for by an army of assistants and managers, now found myself fumbling with bedpans and medication schedules. The confident stage presence that commanded thousands melted away in the face of my mother's needs. Each task, adjusting her pillows, helping her sip water, deciphering doctor's instructions, felt monumental, a test I was woefully unprepared for. In quiet moments, when Mom drifted into fitful sleep, my mind wandered back to the early days of my career. The excitement of my first real gig in a smoky bar in the city. The thrill of hearing my voice on the radio for the first time. The dizzying ascent from local sensation to national star. But with each glittering memory came a pang of guilt. How many of Mom's calls had I missed during those whirlwind years? How many family gatherings had I skipped, always with the excuse of another show, another recording session? One afternoon, as I struggled to coax Mom into eating, a flash of my teenage self superimposed over the scene. I saw myself, young and bursting with ambition, declaring to this same woman that I was destined for greater things than our small town could offer. The pride in her eyes, then, mixed with a sadness I hadn't understood, now haunted me. Had she known, even then, the cost my dreams would exact on our family? The days blurred together, a monotonous cycle of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and worried consultations with doctors. My world, once filled with spotlights and applause, shrank to the confines of this sterile room in our old family home. The contrast was jarring. Where once I'd thrived on the energy of crowds, I now found myself craving the quiet moments. Mom's hand in mine, the soft sound of her breathing, the rare smile that lit up her face when she was lucid enough to recognize me. In the dead of night, when the house creaked with familiar old sounds, I often found myself at the battered upright piano in the living room. My fingers would move of their own accord, playing melodies from my childhood. Lullabies Mom had sung, simple tunes it composed before I knew anything about fame or fortune. In those moments, with Miguel's soft snores drifting from the next room, I felt the stirring of something long dormant, a connection to my roots, to the pure joy of music, untainted by commercial pressures. As weeks passed, I watched my polished nails chip, my designer clothes give way to comfortable, worn outfits better suited for long hospital vigils. The transformation wasn't just external. Each day spent caring for Mom, each awkward interaction with Miguel, chipped away at the carefully constructed persona I'd built. The mask of the confident, carefree star was crumbling, revealing the uncertain, vulnerable woman beneath. One evening, as I helped Mom settle in for the night, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. Her eyes, clouded with medication but suddenly sharp, searched my face. In that moment, I felt stripped bare, all my successes and failures laid out before her knowing gaze. As I met her eyes, I realized that the greatest performance of my life wasn't on any stage. It was here, in this quiet room, learning to be a daughter again. The weight of care was heavy, yes, but as I kissed Mom's forehead and turned out the light, I felt something else too, a sense of purpose, of rightness, that no standing ovation had ever given me. The journey ahead was daunting, but for the first time since coming home, I felt ready to face it. The tension in the house was palpable, a living thing that seemed to grow with each passing day. Miguel and I moved around each other like wary animals, our interactions limited to terse updates about Mom's condition and the occasional awkward silence over hurried meals. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy between us, a dam ready to burst at the slightest provocation. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the storm finally broke. I was sorting through old photographs in the living room, a bittersweet task that had me alternating between smiles and tears. Miguel entered, his footsteps heavy, his face a mask of barely contained frustration. I could feel his eyes on me, burning with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. The first barbed comment came out of nowhere, a sharp remark about my vacation from my glamorous life. I felt my defenses rise, the old instinct to protect myself kicking in. My response was equally cutting, a pointed reminder of who was paying for Mom's medical bills. And just like that, years of resentment and hurt came pouring out. Miguel's words were like arrows, each one finding its mark with unerring accuracy. He spoke of lonely birthdays, of Mom's quiet disappointment each time I missed a family gathering, of the burden of being the one left behind. His voice, usually so controlled, trembled with emotion as he recounted the nights he'd spent comforting our mother as she worried about her absent daughter. I found myself responding in kind, my own hurt and guilt manifesting as anger. I lashed out, reminding him of the opportunities my success had afforded our family, of the dreams I'd pursued that he'd been too afraid to chase. Each word felt like poison on my tongue, but I couldn't stop the torrent once it had begun. We circled each other in the small living room, our voices rising and falling like waves. Old grievances surfaced, the guitar I'd borrowed for my first big show and never returned, the local gigs Miguel had lined up for us that he'd abandoned for a chance at a record deal. With each accusation, each bitter reminder of past slights, I saw the gulf between us widen. In a moment of cruel clarity, I realized how much we mirrored each other in our pain. Miguel's clenched fists echoed my own tense posture. The hurt in his eyes was a reflection of the ache in my chest. We were two sides of the same coin, both wounded by my departure, both struggling to reconcile the past with the present. As our argument reached a fever pitch, a framed photo crashed to the floor, the sound of shattering glass cutting through our angry words. We both froze, staring at the image now exposed. A younger version of ourselves, arms around each other, grinning at the camera without a care in the world. The sight of it, of the bond we once shared, seemed to deflate us both. In the sudden silence, the weight of our words hung heavy in the air. Miguel's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had come. I felt my own anger dissipate, leaving behind a hollow ache and a bone-deep weariness. We stood there, amidst the debris of our confrontation, neither knowing how to bridge the chasm we'd just exposed. The realization of how far we'd drifted, of how much hurt we'd both been carrying, was overwhelming. In that moment, I saw not the resentful man who'd been my reluctant housemate these past weeks, but the little brother I had left behind, the one who'd once been my closest confidant and biggest fan. As Miguel turned away, his hand running through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made my heart clench, I was struck by an overwhelming urge to reach out, to try and salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. But the words stuck in my throat. Years of distance and misunderstanding forming a barrier I didn't know how to breach. He paused at the doorway, his back to me, tension visible in every line of his body. For a moment, I thought he might turn back, might offer some word to ease the ache between us. But then he was gone, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving me alone with the shattered remnants of our shared past and the daunting question of how, or if, we could ever find our way back to each other. The old community center stood at the edge of town, its faded paint and creaky floorboards a testament to years of use and neglect. As I pushed open the heavy doors, the familiar scent of dust and wood polish enveloped me, triggering a flood of memories. This was where it had all begun. My first public performance, my first standing ovation, the first time I'd truly felt the power of my voice. I wandered through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room held a piece of my past. The small stage where I'd sung in the school choir, the cramped practice rooms where Miguel and I had spent countless hours honing our skills. It was here, in this unremarkable building in our small town, that my dreams had taken flight. In the main hall, I found the old upright piano, its keys yellowed with age but still in tune. My fingers ghosted over the ivory, muscle memory taking over as I began to play. The melody that emerged wasn't one of my chart-topping hits, but a simple tune Miguel and I had composed together as teenagers. As the notes filled the air, I felt a piece of myself I'd long forgotten begin to stir. Lost in the music, I didn't hear the door open. It wasn't until the song ended that I noticed Miguel standing in the shadows, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the echoes of our shared past hanging between us. When Miguel finally broke the silence, his voice was soft, tinged with a melancholy I had never heard before. He spoke of the years after I had left, of gigs in local bars and small-town festivals. He told me about the band he'd formed, their dreams of making it big, of following in my footsteps. But life, it seemed, had other plans. As Miguel talked, I began to see him in a new light. The resentment I'd sensed in him since my return took on a different shape. It wasn't just about my absence, but about the dreams he'd had to set aside. He spoke of turning down a scholarship to a music school in São Paulo to stay and care for our aging parents, of putting his guitar away when the responsibilities of running the family business became too much. The weight of his sacrifices pressed down on me, adding to the guilt I already carried. I had been so caught up in my own journey, my own success, that I had never stopped to consider the cost to those it left behind. Miguel's unfulfilled dreams were the flip side of my achieved ones, a stark reminder of the diverging paths our lives had taken. As the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves slipping into old habits. Miguel picked up a guitar that had been left in the corner, and soon we were playing together. Our voices blending in harmonies we'd perfected years ago. The music flowed between us, bridging the gap that words couldn't seem to cross. In those moments, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared past, I felt a shift. The bitterness that had colored our interactions since my return began to soften. As we played songs from our youth, I saw flashes of the brother I remembered. The mischievous grin, the passionate gleam in his eyes when he hit a perfect chord. When we finally left the community center, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. Walking side by side, we were quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The anger and resentment had been replaced by a tentative understanding, a fragile bridge built on the foundations of our shared love for music. That night, as I lay in bed, the day's revelations swirled in my mind. I thought about the paths we'd taken, Miguel and I, and the crossroads where we'd diverged. I thought about the sacrifices he'd made, the dreams he'd set aside, and the life I had built on the other side of those choices. As sleep finally claimed me, one thought remained clear. The echoes of our past, painful as they were, had opened a door. It was up to us now to decide whether we would walk through it together or let it close on the possibility of reconciliation. The call came in the middle of the night, jolting us from uneasy sleep. Mom's condition had deteriorated rapidly. The doctors were asking us to come immediately. In the frantic rush to the hospital, the fragile peace Miguel and I had built over the past few days shattered like glass. Tension crackled between us as we sped through empty streets, each blaming the other for not noticing earlier signs of Mom's decline. My accusation that Miguel should have called me sooner was met with a biting retort about my perpetual absence. By the time we reached the hospital, we were barely speaking, united only in our fear for Mom. The waiting room became our battleground, harsh whispers and accusatory glares filling the spaces between updates from grim-faced doctors. As hours ticked by with no improvement in Mom's condition, our frayed nerves finally snapped. It was a careless comment from me about the quality of care in our small-town hospital that lit the fuse. Miguel exploded, years of pent-up resentment pouring out in a torrent of words. He threw my success back in my face, painting it as a betrayal of our family, of our roots. Each syllable dripped with bitterness, cutting deeper than any criticism from the harshest music critic ever had. I retaliated, my own anger and guilt finding release in cruel jabs about his lack of ambition, his choice to remain stuck in this town while I soared. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had gone too far, but pride kept me from taking them back. Miguel's face went white, then flushed with fury.
You have no idea what it means to sacrifice for family. You ran away to chase your dreams, leaving us to pick up the pieces. Where were you when Dad died? When Mom started forgetting things? You don't get to waltz back in now and play the dutiful daughter.
His words hit me like physical blows, each one exposing the selfishness I'd tried so hard to justify over the years. But instead of backing down, I lashed out again, accusing him of jealousy, of using family as an excuse for his own failed ambitions. We might have come to blows if a nurse hadn't intervened, her stern warning about disturbing other patients cutting through our anger. We retreated to opposite corners of the waiting room, the air between us thick with unresolved tension. As dawn broke, casting weak light through smudged windows, a doctor approached with news. Mom had stabilized, but the prognosis wasn't good. She would need round-the-clock care, possibly for the rest of her life. The weight of this revelation settled over us, momentarily eclipsing our personal conflict. In the heavy silence that followed, I caught Miguel's eye. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else, too. A bone-deep weariness that I felt echoed in my own heart. We were both exhausted, not just from the sleepless night, but from years of misunderstanding and hurt. As we stood there, the realization of how close we'd come to losing Mom and each other began to sink in. The pettiness of our argument in the face of her suffering suddenly seemed absurd, even cruel. Yet, the wounds we'd inflicted were too fresh, the chasm between us too wide to be bridged with a simple apology. When we were finally allowed to see Mom, her frail form dwarfed by machines and tubes, the gravity of our situation hit home. This wasn't about us anymore. Our rivalry, our hurt feelings, our divergent paths. It was about the woman who had given us life, who had supported both our dreams, even when they pulled us in opposite directions. As we stood on either side of her bed, Mom's hand clasped weakly between us, I felt a shift. The anger that had fueled our argument began to drain away, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. We might not have resolved our differences, but in that moment, we were united in our love for her. Leaving the hospital that morning, exhausted and emotionally raw, neither of us spoke. But as we parted ways in the parking lot, I saw something in Miguel's eyes that gave me hope. A flicker of the connection we'd once shared. A silent acknowledgement that perhaps, for Mom's sake if nothing else, we needed to find a way forward together. The breaking point had come and gone, leaving destruction in its wake. But as I drove home, in the pale morning light, I dared to hope that from these ashes, something new might rise. A chance to rebuild not just our relationship with each other, but our understanding of what family truly means. The days following Mom's crisis blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, and sleepless nights. Miguel and I moved around each other like wary dancers, the echoes of our argument still ringing in the spaces between us. Yet, as we fell into the rhythm of caring for Mom, something began to shift. It started small. A murmured thank you as I passed Miguel a cup of coffee during a long night at Mom's bedside, a nod of appreciation when he remembered to bring my favorite sandwich from the cafeteria. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the jagged edges of our anger began to smooth. One evening, as we sat in Mom's room, the only sound the steady beep of monitors, Miguel broke our uneasy silence.
Do you remember how Mom used to sing to us when we were sick?
I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Without thinking, I began to hum the old lullaby, my voice barely above a whisper. After a moment, Miguel's deeper tone joined mine, our voices blending in a harmony we'd perfected years ago. As the last notes faded, I looked up to see Mom's eyes open, a faint smile on her lips. In that moment, something cracked open inside me. I saw the tears in Miguel's eyes and realized they mirrored my own. We'd been so caught up in our own pain, we'd forgotten the power of the gift we shared, the ability to bring comfort through music. From that night on, our visits to the hospital took on a different tone. We would bring our guitars, filling Mom's room with gentle melodies and soft harmonies. The nurses would often pause in the doorway, smiling as our music drifted down the sterile hallways. It wasn't just for Mom, though her face would light up whenever we played. It was for us, too, a way to reconnect without the weight of words. As we collaborated on care schedules and treatment decisions, I began to see Miguel in a new light. I watched him patiently explain medical terms to our confused mother, saw the gentleness in his hands as he helped her sit up, noticed the dark circles under his eyes from nights spent researching her condition. The brother I had dismissed as lacking ambition was revealing a strength and dedication I had been too blind to see before. One afternoon, as we left the hospital, Miguel hesitantly asked if he'd like to see the music school he'd started in the old community center. Walking into the small, vibrant space, seeing the walls adorned with student artwork, and hearing the sounds of practice rooms filled with aspiring musicians, I felt a swell of pride for what he'd built.
It's not a world tour, but it means something here.
He said, a hint of his old defensiveness creeping in. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since I had come home. It's amazing. Miguel, I said, meaning every word. You're changing lives. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. In that moment, I saw the brother I remembered from our youth. Passionate, creative, full of dreams. I realized with a pang that those dreams hadn't died. They'd just taken a different shape than mine. As the weeks passed, we fell into a new routine. Mornings at the hospital with Mom, afternoons helping out at Miguel's school or working on my own music, evenings spent on the porch, guitars in hand, rediscovering the joy of playing together. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. About our fears, our regrets, the weight of expectations we'd both carried. I learned about the gigs Miguel had played in local bars, the songs he'd written but never recorded. He listened as I opened up about the loneliness of life on the road, the pressure of always having to be on. We shared stories of Mom and Dad, filling in the gaps in each other's memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. It wasn't always easy. Old habits die hard, and there were still moments of tension, flashes of the hurt we'd carried for so long. But now, instead of letting those moments drive us apart, we faced them together. We were learning, slowly but surely, how to be siblings again. One night, as we sat strumming our guitars, a half-finished song between us, Miguel looked at me with a mix of hesitation and hope.
You know, we always did make a pretty good team.
I felt a smile tugging at my lips, a warmth spreading through my chest. Yeah, I replied. I guess we did. As we bent our heads together over the music, our voices rising in tentative harmony, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. We were finding our way back to each other, note by note, word by word. In the discord of our past, we were creating a new harmony, one that honored our differences as much as our shared roots. The road ahead was still uncertain, with Mom's health and our own rekindled relationship both requiring care and attention. But as we played into the night, the music weaving around us like a healing balm, I knew we'd face whatever came next the way we always should have, together. The town's annual Harvest Festival had always been a big event, but this year it felt different. As Miguel and I stood backstage, the buzz of the crowd filtering through the worn curtains, I felt a familiar mix of excitement and nerves. It had been years since I had performed on this modest stage, yet somehow it felt more daunting than any arena concert I had given. Miguel fidgeted with his guitar strap, a habit I remembered from our teenage years.
You sure about this? It's not exactly the glitz and glamour you're used to.
I met his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there. I've never been more sure, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. This wasn't just another performance. It was a homecoming, a reconciliation, a new beginning. As we stepped onto the stage, the warm applause of friends and neighbors washed over us. I scanned the crowd, seeing familiar faces, my old music teacher, beaming with pride, the owner of the diner where I'd had my first job, and there in the front row, Mom in her wheelchair, her eyes bright with anticipation. Miguel and I exchanged a glance, years of shared history passing between us in that moment. Then, with a nod, we began to play. The first notes of our mother's lullaby, the cradle's song, filled the air. It was a piece we'd arranged together over the past few weeks, blending the simple melody of our childhood with the musical skills we'd each developed over the years. As our voices joined in harmony, I felt something shift. The tension that had lingered between us, even as we had worked to rebuild our relationship, seemed to melt away. In its place was a connection I'd almost forgotten, the pure joy of making music with my brother. We moved through our set, a mix of original compositions and covers that held special meaning for us. With each song, I could feel the audience responding, their energy feeding our performance. But it was more than that. In Miguel's playing, I heard echoes of late-night jam sessions in our childhood bedroom. In the way he anticipated my phrasing, matching his guitar to my voice, I recognized the musical shorthand we'd developed years ago. As we neared the end of our performance, Miguel caught my eye. With a slight nod, he began to play the opening chords of a song I didn't recognize. It took me a moment to realize it was one of his own compositions, one he'd never shared with me before. As he began to sing, his voice rich with emotion, I understood why. It was a song about family, about the pain of separation and the hope of reunion, about the strength found in forgiveness and the courage it takes to start again. As the chorus approached, Miguel looked at me expectantly. Without hesitation, I joined in, our voices blending as if we'd rehearsed it 100 times. In that moment, performing my brother's song about our shared journey, I felt a profound sense of healing. The wounds we'd inflicted on each other over the years, the misunderstandings and resentments seemed to fade into the background. What remained was the unbreakable bond of family, strengthened rather than weakened by the trials we had faced. As the last notes faded away, there was a moment of hushed silence before the audience erupted in applause. Miguel and I stood there, slightly breathless, grinning at each other like we used to after nailing a difficult piece. When we took our bows, our hands clasped tightly together, I felt a surge of pride, not for myself, but for us, for what we'd overcome and what we'd created together. After the show, as we made our way through the crowd of well-wishers, we finally reached Mom. Her eyes were shining with tears, but her smile was radiant.
My beautiful children, together again.
Her voice was weak but full of love. As we knelt beside her wheelchair, each holding one of her hands, I felt the weight of the future settling on us. Mom's condition wasn't improving, and we knew the road ahead would be challenging. But looking at Miguel, seeing the determination and love in his eyes, I knew we'd face it as a team. Later that night, as we sat on the porch of our childhood home, guitars in hand and a comfortable silence between us, Miguel spoke.
You know, I always thought your leaving was the thing that broke us. But maybe it was just part of the journey we needed to take to find our way back.
I nodded, understanding the truth in his words. We're different people now, I replied, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we needed to grow apart to appreciate what we have together. As we started to play again, our voices rising in the quiet night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future was uncertain, but we'd face it together. Two different melodies creating a harmony all our own. The cradle's song had brought us full circle, back to our roots and to each other. And in that music, in the love of our family and our shared passion, we'd found not just reconciliation, but a new beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that this, the music we made together, the bond we'd rekindled, would be our strength and our solace.
Hey there, Unraveling Ties family. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I hope it touched your heart, made you think, or even inspired you in some way. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below and share your perspective with our community. Your voice matters to us. If you enjoyed today's story and want to be a part of our journey as we unravel the complexities of human relationships, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story. We're always eager to explore new angles and dive into the themes that resonate with you the most. So tell us, what kind of stories would you like to see in upcoming episodes? Your input helps us create content that you'll love. And hey, if today's story reminded you of a personal experience or a tale you'd like to share, we're all ears. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. Who knows, your story might even inspire a future Unraveling Ties episode. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Unraveling Ties family. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep embracing the ties that bind us and never stop exploring the depths of the human heart. See you in the next video.